videos.
Using Squarespace helped my business grow from a journal to a website, store and class platform. My Squarespace is my headquarters.
So before I start this video, let me ask you a question. When you're starting your new illustration and all of a sudden you're just deep into that illustration, do you feel like your edges are just not feeling as sharp? You feel like the edges are looking low quality, and the whole drawing, when you try to print your drawings, they're just not feeling really high quality. There's something to them. Maybe the edges are just looking really pixelated, or like the quality of the drawing itself just doesn't look as good as it could be. Well, today we're going to answer all of these questions, and I'm going to show you a few places where you may be actually missing. And we're also going to be building two custom brushes, one with tapering and one without, that both are going to be ready for high quality illustration. This is a video that you definitely don't want to miss, because the files that we will be creating in this video, I'm going to be putting them as a link in the description box down below. In my Gumroad page, it's going to be free, and it's going to be for you to be able to download these files and start working with some high quality illustrations for your own artwork. My name is Leo and you're watching Ghost Paper, so now let's get to it. Alright, so the first possibility here is that you're actually working with the wrong canvas in Procreate. And that is something that is extremely important whenever you're starting to create a new illustration. So, for example, we can make illustrations that should go or are going to go as posters. So you're going to send them off to print. And you could also work with illustrations that are only going to be seen digitally. The problem is, for example, when you create a file that doesn't hold enough quality to be printed and you're trying to make a poster. So, to give you a very obvious...
This is our home.
Hi guys, and welcome to Braincam Draws. Today I want to talk about how you can improve a drawing. This is also a feedback video at the same time. I don't know if you recalled, but I posted a video some time ago where I encouraged my subscribers to send in their drawings, and then I would pick some and I would get some feedback to them on how they could improve their drawing. And a lot of people send in their drawings, and honestly I'm so flattered about the amount of drawings that were sent in and how many of you were so kind in praising what I do and my channel, even though I'm not the best at uploading videos, so thank you so much for that. But I did pick some drawings, and for this video we're going to focus on this drawing by Marina Suzuki. I don't know if I'm saying this right, she's from Japan. And actually Marina sent in two drawings. She sent in this one and then this one. And the reason that I have both of these drawings in this video is actually because
just listening to some
I think this drawing in particular is actually
Procreate tutorials.
really well pulled off.
I've listened to it for like a week now. I've had my tablet for...
Really hope it's
is it a whole week?
I don't know if Marina could be a Japanese male name.
I don't know if I had a week yet. It's right at a week, like 5-6 days, something like that.
This drawing because I think it works really well, but I'll come back to this afterwards and tell you why I think it works really well. But for this drawing, I think that we could do some small improvements. Looking at this drawing, the first thing that I notice, let me just write it down.
Yeah, about 5 days. I think I got it on Thursday or Friday of last week. So
in its colors.
I've only done one drawing.
So there are no
like that's colored in,
cheating?
And it's like some really simple shit. I've done tons of sketches and just keep deleting them shits. Yeah, it's kind of hard to draw on the iPad, yeah. But like they're saying, the different kind of brushes and different size canvases.
So these are the three things that I would focus in on is drawing. But also, before you focus in on
So,
these things, which is normally the steps you go through after you made your line art, is
but it was definitely a learning curve to
does
this
the
shit.
line
Man.
art work? And
But I
this
see how
is
people like drawing
sort
on
of like a
tablets, though.
step on its own before you go to the second step, where you go in and you color and you shade and you work on your texture.
Bro, I left my damn grinder
And
downstairs.
what I would do with this drawing
Man.
was to look first and foremost on how does this line art work for me. You could go in and then work on top of this drawing already, which I of course have the benefit of, but I think for this particular drawing I want to strip down to the line art level. So if we go ahead and turn down the opacity on this one.
La encuadernación artística es un oficio, pero es también una forma de expresión plástica. El reto es
This one, we remove the dark layer there, and then put a layer on top of the layer that we want to fix and draw on. So now I'm going to take a look at this line art right here. I'm just going to pick this
The
brush
tablets,
from,
the draw. I can imagine, like I say,
which I think some of you guys are familiar with.
I can see, like, once you get the hang of it, it's a tool just like anything else, you know? And once you can use that tool, it's... I was just playing around with some brushes a little while ago, like, man, they got one brush that, like, it's like smoke, like these different elements. I didn't even know all that shit was on there until today. Like, you got... I forgot what it's called, but it's like a line, but that shit just make it glows like a glowing streak. Like, I don't know, you know how hard it is to make something look like it's glowing if you're drawing or painting it, like with physical materials, color pencils, pastels, oil paints, to make something look like it's glowing, like a light bulb or a glow stick in the dark or a firefly. That's pretty difficult to do. You know, it's a certain quality to the technique you have to use to make things look like it's glowing or to make things look shiny. But with the Procreate, they just got like some built-in shit, just glow streaks, just whoosh. Oh, that shit looks like it's fucking glowing. Like, oh shit. Like, so I can see, like, once you understand all the functions and the capabilities of each function, you know, it's I mean, you can create any kind of art on that shit, yo. Really. And make it look like almost anything. So, say you make that shit like an oil painting, or you can make it look like a simple ass poster. So I'm gonna just keep practicing on that shit, yo, and just try to get better at it and start doing like a little bit of digital art here and there. Probably do like some t-shirt designs, and now I can do logos for people. Let me go grab my other utensils.
Going for the line tail, it's one of my favorite sketches, or favorite brushes for sketches. You can also use the construction pencil or the awesome paint sketch, but you know, at the moment this one is my favorite. I tend to go back and forth a little. So, as we can see here, we have a mole creature. I think that's very obvious. I think she hit that pretty good. And the first thing that I'm going to do when working with this mole creature is actually I'm going to flip the canvas, because right now I'm used to seeing it from this view. So I'm going to challenge my eye a little and turn it around. So I think the face for me is actually okay in this picture. But I think there's something with this arm right here. I think it's a little too high up. So I think I would take that down a little bit. I would also make sure that in my line art, I would actually put in just a little bit of texture. Sometimes it's okay that you're working with is not like super smooth, clean lines. I think it adds a little something to the drawing. I can also see in this drawing that even though we're working with a mole picture, we don't really have an ear. I think I would be tempted to put in a little ear on it because it's still part of the facial features and it looks cute on an animal. And remember now, when I do this feedback, that I take the liberty to do my own thing as well. This is not to say that you should do it as well. It's just my kind of style, and you can either take it in and see if you want to adopt it or whatever, but you don't have to do that. As I said in my video, I'm taking the liberty to work with the drawings as I see fit as well. Now, another thing that I would do with line art would be to give it a little more space. I think the body is cut off a little too soon. So I think that I would definitely try and give it a little bit more room, if that makes sense. Just a little. What I'm going to do now with this drawing is I'm going to take it back like this. Then I'm going to put in the eye. What I really like about Marina's drawing here is actually she has the eyebrow all the way down here, and that works pretty well too. I think I'm going to do that as well. I kind of like what she did with that eye right there. So I think I'm going to stick with that and copy it a little bit. So you have that kind of sad face going on. I'm just going to go ahead and remove that layer completely to make sure that my line
So,
fits.
how's everybody's afternoon going? I tried to go file my taxes and they were too busy today. I just walked in
Here we
there
are.
and it was like, oh, can you come back tomorrow? So
Extra
now I have an
textures,
appointment for tomorrow afternoon.
because, again, that's
Thought I
something
could
that
just slide in real
I
easy
really
and get
like
that
to
shit
work
taken
with.
care of, or it slips my mind. I had to redo my registration. I got that done.
I'm gonna turn these
And
up
paid my
again
taxes.
because
Got that done.
now I want to use
Oh, my property taxes.
those.
And now I gotta file my
just want
income taxes.
Like a tinier thumbnail to work
Or whatever.
But
And
I
then
put
that'll
in
be most of
the
my major
colors.
shit for the year.
I'm going to work with the base color that
Yeah.
Marina is already using in her drawing, and I'm going to use it to block in. Now, because I have a pretty solid line art right here, I think I'm just going to connect the holes in that line art, and then I'm going to use a little trick.
To support local restaurants, we've been to every city, including Little Rock and even
Worcester.
And tonight, I'll be eating the
Chicken quesadilla from Tony's Tex-Mex.
In
Katie.
Do you think they bought it? Oh yeah.
The biggest strength of Black women in business is perseverance. Mediocrity is not an option.
Join MasterCard in supporting small businesses and start something priceless.
Now what I'm going to do with the selection tool is that I'm going to put it on automatic, and then I'm going to select the area around your line art. So it's important that you stay on your layer where you have your line art, and then you select the area around it. Now if you hold your pen down, you can see you can turn the threshold up and down, and see this is apparently too much. Then it selects the inside of the line art, but around 9.3 it doesn't. Then you go to invert in the menu, and it selects everything inside your line art. This is not a perfect method of coloring, but it does make it a little easier. It's kind of like a shortcut that you can correct. And then you go to the layer below your line art where you want to color, and then you simply color it like this. Now you have that flat coloring. Now if you deselect it, you can see some of the areas it has kind of colored a little too much of the line art. But you can always go in afterwards and you can correct that. And probably when you get to the texture level, you're gonna go in anyways and correct the outer line of that. So this is fine for now. Now we make another layer, clipping mask, and now we want to go in and color the rest like this. Now there is nothing wrong with the color that was picked for this drawing, none at all. The only problem there is that there is just not enough nuances in the color. It's two very simple colors that lacks a little bit of life in a way. I would actually go in and also color the ear like that. And maybe we could even play around with some different colors in these ones. Maybe we could go in here, we could make it slightly redder and a bit more gray, and then we could go in and we could make different color for the stomach. So that is maybe our flat colors. Then I would want to go into the smudge tool, and for the smudge brush I use my own brush again called Awesome Smudge Paint. And I could sort of go in and smudge out edges right here, just to give it a little extra like that. Now, I want to make another layer again.
Delicious.
And turn it on clipping mask. And this layer I want to use for some shadows and some highlights already. And to do that, I want to go in and pick the dark blue. I'm going to drag it over, turn it on multiply. Then I want to turn the opacity down to, let's say, 36, like this. Then I'm going to create a mask over this and pick an airbrush, again from my modified brush set.
So that's the one drawing I did.
Of course, get
and this is
store.
from a tutorial trying to look how to do the shadows,
and I would erase
so it looks like 3D like that.
To do that, I need to figure out where my light source is.
I need to finish that tutorial.
Since we have
actually,
so much going on in the face of this creature, I want my light source to be.
I have just been trying to like play around with it a little bit by myself.
So if the light source, if the light hits here, it would probably fall.
Oh, it's so hard to see any of this.
Right here. So
I've been trying to figure out like what's my favorite brush to draw with.
Excellent.
So I've been using this one today. It's a inking brush, I think. It's yeah, it says inking, and then it's the syrup.
As I look
so I'm using this brush right here.
kind of forgot something.
And normally it'll just take you to the top one in most of the list. But then if you go to the list one time and select the brush,
White in there?
this is something that is pretty cool.
Now, what
So like, if you go to a list, if you go to one of the categories and you like if I go to textures, it'll have the last texture brush that I selected. Now you remember I was in inking and it was the syrup brush. So if I go back to inking, that same brush is still selected. So essentially you can have like 4 or 5 brushes selected in different categories. You just can't have like 2 different brushes in the same category selected. So each one that I've been in, it still shows like the last brush that I was playing around with. And so what I've been doing is I'm using the inking brush, the drawing brush, and the airbrush. And the airbrush, I just use the default one at the top. The drawing, I use the default one at the top. And the inking, I said I go halfway down the list to this one right here. And so for lines, I've been doing this with lines. And for coloring and shading, I've been using the drawing brush. And for blending, I was using the airbrush. And then there's like spray paints and charcoal. Like there's all kind of like each one got like 6-7 brushes in it. Oh, where's the ones? Oh, this right here, luminous. I was like, what the fuck is that? Flare. I'm like, yo, light pen, light brush, pulse. This one doesn't have as many, but like you can just make some shit like that just by tapping. Y'all literally did nothing. Oh, and that's black. So what if I just do a red flare? Just literally just tap, yo, and then you know how hard that would be to color or paint some shit like that. Yo, that shit is. I don't know, like it's the. And then you have the light brush. I think I play with this one. Yeah, that shit looks literally like it's glowing. And then the harder you press, the more it glows. It is so weird. So. Honestly, we're just doing stuff like that for about an hour. I don't know how a turtle shell supposed to look. I may need a reference picture for a shell. How do turtle shells? I know they're like. Speed turtle. That's I've been just doodling shit, yo. Really. This is pretty fun. I want to learn how to do better and quicker coloring and shading for like simpler stuff, and then start to figure out how to like use the paint brushes on here better. It's crazy how this thing fucking like makes your circles straight and how it makes your line straight for you. Also, I haven't been drawing things from my mind in like fucking years. This is even just great exercise for my imagination because I'm always working from a reference photo, which is which is cool. I mean, that's the path I just chose to take. But I know other artists who always just like draw from their imagination or draw from their imagination most of the time, or at least sometimes. just tend to be stronger because they can do that and, you know, use a reference photo just as well. So I definitely need to get back into like, because when I wanted to do like comic books and stuff, that's the only way you come up with your own character. Just like make them shits up. Right? Yeah. Once I started, I always get commissions for photos, and then I mean, my mentor told me to start taking pictures and using reference photos. And so I definitely like that. But I still see the advantage of being able to draw from your imagination as well. It is definitely critical. So I'm just drawing a pretty generic face here. hmm So this is just a sketch layer, and then you can always add a layer. Then come back and clean it up a little bit. Oh, my bad, yo. I done got all the way into this thing just now. This nigga bumped it like it's 2001. That's something I kind of noticed over the years. Like, a lot of people don't have like loud systems in their cars. Well, I don't know. Not in every other. That line was not going right at all. All right. Really should be painting. I'll come back to that.
Sometimes medical malpractice.
People are not asking the right questions. They're not asking the right questions because they kind of think we already.
What's your open experience?
How's Brooklyn?
It's grim.
Is
It's
it?
grim right
Yeah?
now. I've lived in New York for the majority of my life. I love New York City, and this is by far the grimmest I have ever seen it.
Really?
I mean, this winter, because it's everything that the entire country is facing, but it's the worst for COVID. It's also extremely cold. A lot of city services seem to have been impaired in one way or another. The streets are covered in garbage and ice and dog shit, and pretty much the only thing that I do to maintain my sanity is run, but everything, including the outdoor running track, is covered in ice and shit. And so it's this dystopian, frozen, pandemic landscape where every local business that I loved is closing down. It's a dark time.
Yeah, I hear that about Los Angeles. I saw a lot of it, but I got out early. I saw the writing on the wall, and I was looking at them in May. I just once the lockdown got extended, once they're like, we're just gonna lock down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I was like, that makes sense. And then here we are in April, all the way through April. Here we are in May, and I'm like, oh, they're never gonna let us out of this. I was like, and then the crime started happening, and it started getting dark. And I was like, oh, we gotta get the fuck out of here. The homeless thing was like flowers blooming out of rocks, like out of cracks in the concrete. It's like more tents. Like Los Angeles is filled with tents. Like you can't believe it. Like when I tell people about it and then they go there, they're like, oh, I thought you were exaggerating. Like no, I was understating. Like Los Angeles is overwhelmed with tents. It's fucking crazy. Like you can't believe that on La Brea they just allow people to set up tents everywhere. It's nuts.
Well, yeah, what are people going to do?
That's the question. What are people going to do? Yeah, where are you going to put them? Do you have hospitals available for? And a lot of those, the problem is a lot of those shelters that won't let them do drugs.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, I would rather be in a fucking tent outside by the beach than be under your thumb. Because Los Angeles still get cold, you know? I mean, a cold day is 50, you know? It's a big deal.
Right.
Sleeping bag or outside, it's nice.
Yeah, it's really emphasized a lot of these economic divides, because everyone in New York just orders everything on Amazon.
Yeah.
So every apartment building in every nice part of New York receives a daily shipment of every tenant's stuff from Amazon. And then there's like a secondary economy of people just going into all the buildings and stealing all the packages.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that, yeah. I've seen a lot of Ring videos, like doorbell camera videos of people stealing shit.
Oh yeah, it's almost comical. I mean, I had one where I was loading my car with bags at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and in the lobby of my building for maybe 15 minutes, somebody just, as soon as I walk around the corner, someone goes and scoops everything up. Yeah, it's a wild time, and I hope we're coming out of it. I mean, right when I came to Austin, this is the first time I've been on an airplane since the beginning of the pandemic. You're the first person I've spoken to without a mask.
No, really?
The first face I've
Did
seen.
you feel weird coming in here? But you knew everyone was tested.
I felt fine. I've just been very careful, and because it's all so cold in New York, it just promotes this prison cell-like lifestyle where I'm just sitting in my apartment reading and doing push-ups all day.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
The dog shit thing is like, so people just don't clean up anymore? They just gave up?
You know how it is. There's this kind of tumbling character where things just start to accumulate, and then no one shovels the streets, and then it gets easier. Probably it's harder to pick it up because there's just like mounting layers of garbage everywhere, and it just starts to look increasingly disgusting. I mean, maybe we'll just get out of this in a couple weeks, and everything will be.
Oh yeah. Well, the problem that I don't think the people that shut everything down for a fucking year ever take into consideration is that people don't have resources to bounce back. Things don't bounce back on their own, right? If you want to start a business, it takes money. Like, it takes quite a bit of money to get a lease, to put the stock on the shelves, to hire employees. And when you've been out of business for a year, you don't have any money. So you probably used up all savings if you had any savings. Try getting a loan when you don't have anything. There's no real logical path forward for a lot of these businesses. In Los Angeles, 75% of the restaurants are gone.
Oh yeah, I'm so worried about the restaurants in New York. Yeah, it's terrible. It doesn't seem like it's even talked about sufficiently.
No.
Because in New York in the wintertime, I mean, they're really trying. They're doing things that I would have never, like, truly extraordinary things, like making these little heated space gazebos that are covered in Mylar on the inside, and you know, ultimately most people don't even really want to do that. So then there's this weird conflict of, is it moral to support these businesses because you want them to stay in business, or are you feeding into a system where people are subjecting themselves to unsafe working conditions, and is it actually immoral to go to restaurants? And of course people endlessly argue about that.
Well, personal choices are not immoral, right? So if the people decide that they're willing to work there and they're masked up and they feel safe working there, isn't that better than not having a choice to work there?
I guess the idea is that instead of people going on unemployment, they feel pressured to put themselves at risk when they really should be at home, not potentially spreading coronavirus, and ideally receiving some sort of government assistance.
Well, it's also like, when does the government assistance run out? Because it has run out for a lot of people. There is no more unemployment for a lot of folks. And then on top of that, the way everything's been mismanaged is so terrible in so many ways. Like, why is it okay to be at Target on top of people? Why is it okay to be at Walgreens on top of people? But it's not okay to have these mom and pop stores open, or retail stores.
Oh yeah, or, you know, like I said, I haven't been on an airplane until I came to see you, but of course I see all these stories in the news that are like, this guy went on an airplane and he took off his mask and they had to do an emergent landing and they kicked him off the plane and everyone cheered. And if you haven't been on a plane, you just kind of read that and you think, oh yeah, wow, that guy sounds like quite an asshole. Good that they kicked him off the plane. But then on the plane, I hadn't even considered this. Like, what is done with snacks? What are the snack provisions? Are there no more peanuts? Is there no water? And if it is served,
ever take into consideration is that people don't have the resources to bounce back. Things don't bounce back on their own, right? If
I missed that last part. I was actually texting somebody. I was still kind of texting somebody. Hold on.
To put the stock on the shelves, to hire employees, and when you've been out of business for a year, you don't have any money. So you probably used up all savings, if you had any savings. Try getting a loan when you don't have anything. There's no real logical path forward for a lot of these businesses. In Los Angeles, 75% of the restaurants are gone.
Oh yeah, I'm so worried about the restaurants in New York. Yeah, it's terrible. It doesn't seem like it's even talked about sufficiently.
No.
Because in New York in the wintertime, I mean, they're really trying. They're doing things that I would have never, like, truly extraordinary things, like making these little heated space gazebos that are covered in Mylar on the inside, and you know, ultimately most people don't even really want to do that. So then there's this weird conflict of, is it moral to support these businesses because you want them to stay in business?
So we're going to try to do a time lapse. Well, I was going to do a time lapse, but I got a text from my homie.
Restaurants, and of course people endlessly argue about that.
Well, personal choices are not immoral, right? So if the people decide that they're willing to work there and they're masked up and they feel safe working there, isn't that better
I actually
than
want
not
to
having a
do
choice to
a
work
quick
there?
time lapse on some of these highlights on her face.
instead of people
If
going
I got
on
enough memory on my phone, I remember last time I had to like delete a
pressure
lot of
to
photos
put
and
themselves
old
at risk
videos
when
in
they
order to
really
do
should
like
be,
a new time lapse.
at
I was like,
home,
damn.
not potentially spreading
It is what it
coronavirus
is.
and ideally receiving some
All
sort
right.
of government assistance.
Well, it's also like, when does
I
the
think
government
that's a
assistance
good
run
frame.
out? Because it has run out for a lot of people. There is no more unemployment for a lot of folks.
It's kind
And
of
then on top
obstructing
of
the
that,
PlayStation
the
camera.
way
but
it's been
let's move
mismanaged
this
is
up a little
so
bit.
terrible
All right,
in so
that's
many
not too
ways.
bad.
Like, why is it okay to be at Target on top of people? Why is it okay to be at
All right,
Walgreens on
and
top
let's
of
go.
people? But it's not okay to have these mom and pop stores open or retail stores.
Oh yeah, or like I said, I haven't been on an airplane until I came to see you. But of course, I see all these stories in the news that are like, this guy went on an airplane and he took off his mask and they had to do an emergency landing and they kicked him off the plane and everyone cheered. And if you haven't been on a plane, you just kind of read that and you think, oh yeah, wow, that guy sounds like quite an asshole. Good that they kicked him off the plane. But then on the plane, I hadn't even considered this. Like, what is done with snacks? What are the snack provisions? Are there no more peanuts? Is there no water? And if it is served, then everyone has to take off their masks. So this is all just sort of like security theater because they still serve food and everyone unmasks simultaneously to eat. So there's a period of at least 15 minutes where everyone on the plane is unmasked by the doing of the actual airline.
Yeah, it's nonsense. It's full nonsense across the board.
Well, I think people just don't know what to do. It's they're aware that all these things are contradictory. Everyone is trying to do their best. They're confused. They don't understand it even to this day.
That's the part I missed. I heard him say something about contradictory. That's why I had to play it back a little bit because.
You're basically saying I'm not an asshole.
Yeah, and that is something like.
Feel like I care.
Walmarts can be open, but other stores can't be open. You can still get on planes, and it's even if you're not taking off your mask on the plane at all, they're just saying like social distancing.
Protecting you against droplets. Someone sneezes, but you're breathing.
Oh yeah, the masking is definitely good. I think that's pretty well established, but I get what I don't understand is the hypocrisy. Like, if we have established that masking is good, then we also have to not have snacks on the flight.
Or water.
Or water. But so then what do you do?
You're on top of each other. You're sitting 3 people next to each other. I mean, it's like literally the opposite of social distancing.
That's the part. Social distancing. Like, you can't social distance on the plane.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And this was why, when it started, I was one of these people that, I was thinking, well, I work in media. I know the way the media blows everything out of proportion. I remember swine flu. I know that they sell newspapers by making everyone terrified. This can't possibly be as bad as people think it is. And I was sort of in COVID denial. And I was also in the middle of filming the 3rd season of my TV show. So I was just sort of seduced by the momentum of production and didn't want it to end. And people were saying, I don't think we can film anymore. I think we have to stop. And I thought, what, is the world going to shut down?
Yeah, I remember that.
This is unprecedented.
Yeah.
The world isn't going to shut down. We're not going to be kept in our apartments. It's just not conceivable that such a thing could happen.
Cut to 1 year later. Catch new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience for free, only on Spotify. Watch back catalog JRE videos on Spotify, including clips.
So one year into COVID, like,
switch.
Well, we're over a year into COVID, so essentially we got the news for, well, if you want to Google that, because I'm doing a time lapse right now. Google, when did quarantine start in the U.S.? Because I'm kind of fuzzy on that part now. I know, like, they released the information to us in late January. People didn't get really nervous until February. And then was it March or April before we started, like, quarantines and social distancing and mask mandates? How far into last year was it before we started doing that? And, like, but I know we're right at a year mark of this shit now. It's March again, and it's like, But once again, them southern states, you remember them states, the ones that seceded from the Union, because they just, like, said fuck it and want to do their own thing. Them same southern states back at it again. They like, yo man, fuck these mass restrictions and social distancing. Man, like, hey, man, let's get back to normal, people. Let's get back to normal. And so I guess like the governor of Texas was getting like a bunch of crap over that shit. Yeah. But I'm going to be 100% honest. If Pennsylvania were to lift their mandatory masks mandates in public, I wouldn't wear my shit, yo. I just wouldn't. But I mean, I feel like a complete sheep, but I don't want to be that guy who gets an example made out of him, you know? I'm so frustrated the system has me scared like that. It's just, it's totally ridiculous, man. Because it's really, I don't know, it's so weird to me. It's just like, how can you force people to cover their face? Is it good? Is it a good practice? I guess so. Like, I can clearly remember, like, old ass news footage from, decades ago when every time they talked about Japan or China, you know what I'm saying? You'll always see some people on the subway wearing face masks or out in public. And I'm like, why do Chinese people do that? Like, why do Japanese people do that shit? Why are you outside with a mask on? Is it that nasty in your city? Is the air pollution that bad? Does it smell that bad? Are you that fucking bougie? And it's like, no, they have the common courtesy of, if they're not feeling well, if they're kind of coughy or sneezy, they just cover their shit up, willingly, as a good Samaritan or a good citizen or whatever. But I don't think it's like mandatory. I mean, now it is, but back then. But I can see that, like, if someone's not feeling well, if you don't absolutely feel good and you've been like coughing a little bit or even sneezing a little bit, but you do need to go out somewhere, you don't feel terrible, but you got like whatever, a little sneeze or something, little coughy cough, yeah, then cover your face when you go out if that makes it safer for other people. If you feel like you may be coming down with something or you may have a cold or a flu or whatever. But if you feel perfectly fine and you don't have any symptoms, and everyone else around you, if they feel like it's a need for them to cover their face and get vaccinated and all that stuff to protect them, okay, then they're protected. And so if they're wearing a face mask and they got their vaccine and you don't feel sick or you're not showing symptoms and you don't have your face covered, then they shouldn't really worry about it because they have their protection, right? I mean, that's how I see it. I don't know. Like I said, if I didn't have to cover my face in public, I just hate wearing that fucking mask, yo. Who does that, man? It's just so awkward now. But then I think, once again, this thing isn't gonna go anywhere anytime soon, and they're galvanizing the youngest generation now to make this their reality. kids who are 6, 7 years old, and even younger, this is just like right now, they understand that, you know, the government will have ultimate control over your actions. I just want this shit to be over, yo.
I have been using these masks for the last month, and these are easily my favorite breathable masks. About a month ago, I saw an ad for John
There's
Mask.
so many mask
In
companies now.
October
Like,
2017, a strange visitor.
this is the one thing though. Like mask sales, like everybody has a line of masks now. You know what? I'm even thinking about making some like simple digital art specifically just for merchandise, like t-shirts, bandanas, and masks and shit, yo. Cause everybody else got masks. I mean, damn. Everybody making money off this pandemic, though. You know what I'm saying? Bezos and the boys, and they banking. They bankrolling. Everybody. All the mom and pops about to go down. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing gonna be left but Amazon and Walmart. You know what I'm saying? Times are changing fast. I mean, literally right before our eyes. And I understand like the totalitarian dictatorship with the overlay of scientific technology, technocracy, and all this other shit, man. I ain't think I had to live through this shit though, bro. Damn. I thought it'd be science fiction for a little bit longer. No. Yep. Androids, robots, people going to Mars, killer viruses. You know, this is the future. That dystopia they all kept telling y'all about, and all the different stories like A Brave New World, that shit seems pretty fucking real now. 1984, that shit seems pretty. It's like a combination of the two. It's getting scary. Don't worry though, they got that they got a stimulus coming for you. Don't get nervous, people. We got another stimulus. Where the money coming from? We just make it, you know? Make the money out of nothing. So don't you worry. Gonna hit you off with a couple dollars that you pay your rent and buy a little groceries, and that's about it. Once again, I'll say this 1,000 more times if I have to. I don't know why or how, but I have been extremely fortunate during this whole period, yo. Good grief. Like, just hearing other people's stories and in the news and I don't know, man. Even most of my family and close friends, we're all good, yo. Everybody's good. Whew. You know? But some people done lost so much behind this damn thing. You know? Especially when it comes to loss of life. But I have been extremely fortunate. I have not I have not had to suffer any hardship so far. And the ones that I had was so fucking minor and trivial, it's water under the bridge. Don't even think about it. You know what I'm saying? The hardest thing I've been through is my injury and my surgery. And that was some dumb shit I did to myself. I can't even blame that shit on COVID. Damn you, COVID. I had a COVID related injury. What happened? I tore my Achilles tendon because of COVID. How was it COVID's fault? Uh Shit, man, y'all blame COVID for everything else. I'm just trying to hop on the COVID bandwagon, man. I need to blame some shit on COVID too. You know? COVID made me gain 15 pounds from staying in the house because I can't go to work. I need to blame COVID for something one time. You know what I'm saying? COVID made me lose my job for about 2 weeks. For about 2 weeks. And then like 2 months after that, they gave me the 2 weeks that I was out of work. And I was supposed to file unemployment, but they ain't really gave me shit for them 2 weeks unemployment. My job just gave me all that 2 weeks worth of money. They just gave me the checks for it, like regular paychecks all at once, like here. Since you ain't get your unemployment, nigga, and we know you missed 2 weeks of work, have this money. I was like, God damn, oh shit. All right. And I said I injured myself and had surgery, but once again, my job came through on that. I got some good ass insurance, and my job has disability set up, and that shit ain't even happen at work. You know what I'm saying? I ain't get injured at work. I got injured at home. Well, not at home, but you know, not on the clock working for the organization. I got injured elsewhere and couldn't work, and they still gave me my disability. It wasn't much, and I started pinching into my savings a little bit. I wouldn't have made it without that. You know, that little bit, that shit did help. And I said, plus with the decent ass insurance. But other than that, man, I can't complain about nothing at all. Not one thing. Not due to COVID, anyway. My back been hurting a little bit lately. Can I blame that shit on COVID? Or is it just my mattress? I don't know. Damn you, COVID. You ain't want no cicada to fly down your throat. Yo, they say they coming back hard, ain't it? This the year.
It wasn't like anything ever observed from Earth. Called by the Hawaiian name Oumuamua, this object continues to baffle scientists. For one, its brightness varied greatly every 8 hours, suggesting that it was shaped either like a very long cigar or else a massive pancake. Space telescopes did not detect any heat or gases coming off the object, so to this day, no one can say for sure why it deviated from its expected trajectory and actually sped up as it was moving away from the sun. For Harvard professor Avi Loeb, the most logical explanation is also the most controversial. He believes Oumuamua was made by aliens. I'm very thrilled to be speaking with Avi Loeb. He is the Frank B. Bard Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University and also the author of a new book, Extraterrestrial. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Extraterrestrial focuses on the first interstellar object that we've ever detected in our solar system, called Oumuamua. I remember when this was discovered, it was so exciting back in October 2017. It was, short-lived. It kind of went out of the solar system fairly quickly, but it was just, totally unprecedented. And the more we learned about it, the more weird this object seemed to be.
Where's the full interview for this stuff?
You on my radar when you were discussing Oumuamua, is that what I said?
That's the right thing.
Oumuamua, which is an object that we detected in space that you believe could possibly have been extraterrestrial in origin, meaning from some sort of a civilization.
Right.
Yeah. Why did you? Please explain to people what Oumuamua is, why it's so extraordinary, and why you think it's possible that it came from some other intelligent civilization.
Right. So I'm a scientist, and I basically follow the evidence, just like Sherlock Holmes, trying to find solutions. It's a detective story. You have some anomalies, some things that don't quite match what you expected, and you're trying to find an explanation. And the thing about Oumuamua is that it was discovered on October 19th, 2017, a little more than 3 years ago. And it was the very first object that visited our vicinity in the solar system from outside the solar system. It moved too fast to be bound to the sun. Very first object that we have found coming to us from interstellar space, from other places. And at first, astronomers said, oh yeah, it's probably just like the objects we had in our solar system, all the rocks that we have seen before. We've seen comets and asteroids. So a comet is a rock that is covered with ice, water ice. So when it gets close to the sun, the surface gets warmed up and the ice turns into vapor, gas. And you see this beautiful cometary tail behind it. That's what a comet is. An asteroid is just rock without much ice on it. Actually, the first person to explain what comets are was at Harvard, the university that I am affiliated with. And the story goes that, it was Fred Whipple, that he went to Harvard Square and saw all the slush during a winter day, and came up with the idea that it's just icy rock, or icy rocks, or, rocky ice. That's what comet is. And the comets come to us from the periphery of the solar system. And, astronomers said, okay, other stars may have them as well. And, since they are loosely bound, if they are in the periphery, they can be easily ripped apart from their host star. And some of them will fly in our direction. We will see them. So they said, Oumuamua is probably a comet. The only problem is there wasn't any cometary tail. So you look for a duck, but it doesn't look like a duck, So then the question is, what is it? And so people said, okay, it's just a rock without any ice on it. Their problem was that it exhibited an extra push away from the sun. And usually you get it from the rocket effect. That when you make the cometary tail, it pushes the object in the opposite direction, just like a jet plane. A jet plane works by throwing gas out, and that's pushing you forward. So a comet has an extra push when it evaporates. But there was no cometary tail, so why did it show an extra push? That was the key question in my mind, at which point I started thinking, maybe it's not a comet and not an asteroid, something else, you know. And the other strange thing about it, it changes its brightness by a factor of 10 or more, and the brightness of the object, the light that we see, is simply reflected sunlight. So just think about it, think about a piece of paper, razor-thin piece of paper, tumbling in the wind, and changing the area that we can see, the projected area of that piece of paper, by a factor of 10 as we look at it. That's exactly what we inferred from the object spinning around every 8 hours, but changing its brightness by a factor of 10, meaning that the area projected on the sky that we see, that reflects sunlight, changed by a factor of 10. So that means it has an extreme geometry. Most likely flat, if you try to interpret the light that it reflected over as it was tumbling around. And so a flat object, about the size of a football field, that has an extra push, if it were a comet, it needed to lose about 1/10 of its weight. So a lot of evaporation. You can just say, oh, it's a little bit of evaporation, and therefore that's why we don't see it. It should have lost 1/10 of its weight. You know, if we go on a diet and lose 1/10 of our weight, that's a big chunk of mass, right? So this object didn't lose that because we didn't see it, and the Spitzer Space Telescope looked very deeply behind it to see if there are any traces of dust or gas. Didn't see anything. So then, you know, just like Sherlock Holmes, I was trying to think, together with a postdoc of mine, Shmuel Bali, what could explain it, and the only thing that came to mind is reflecting sunlight. So the object itself is being pushed by the sunlight reflecting off its surface. And you know, that would agree with everything we know about the object, but in order for it to work, the object needs to be very thin, like a sail, you know, the sail on a boat. So a sail is pushed by a wind, but you can also push an object, a thin object, by light, and that is called the light sail. And we're actually using this technology now, developing it for space exploration. The big advantage is you don't need to carry the fuel with the spacecraft. You just reflect light off it, and it's being pushed.
There was a science fiction movie that did something like that. I think it was called Sunlight.
Quite possibly. I should mention an anecdote. In September, just a few months ago, in September 2020, was another object that showed an extra push, no cometary tail, and then astronomers gave it a name 2020 SO, okay, September 2020, and then they extrapolated back in time and found that it came from Earth, actually, and then they looked at the history books and saw that indeed there was a rocket booster from a lunar lander that was kicked into space. And this is the object. Now, why did it show this push? Because it's a hollow, it's a very thin structure. So here is an example where we can tell it's artificial. And we know that we made it. But Oumuamua could not have been made by us because it was passing near us just for a few months, very quickly, faster than any rocket that we can launch. That's why we couldn't really chase it when it was receding away from us. And it came from outside the solar system. So, you know, I just do 1 + 1 = 2. I say, okay, it looks very peculiar. Maybe it belongs to another civilization. I just put it in a scientific paper. I didn't think, you know, we didn't have any press release. Then it went viral. The public got extremely interested. And the thing that really surprised me is that my colleagues were pushing back. They were very upset that this possibility was even mentioned. You know, we had a seminar, a lecture about this subject at Harvard, and a colleague of mine, after the lecture, said, this object is really weird. I wish it never existed. Now, to me, that I was really appalled by this. How can you say something like that? You should be happy about whatever nature gives you. You learn something new. If something doesn't look right, it actually teaches us, it's a learning experience. We learn that we have to revise the way we think about reality. That's a good thing. That's not a bad. You shouldn't always be in your comfort zone and think that the future will be the same as the past. So I actually see it as a blessing.
I can't imagine why anybody would be upset that it exists. Like, I wish it didn't exist. That's kind of hilarious.
Because it takes you away from your comfort zone,
I know, but if you're studying the heavens, you're studying the cosmos, what is the ultimate thing that you could find? Another civilization or a piece of something?
Well,
another civilization.
That's exactly my point. But if you go back in time, let me give you two examples. Galileo Galilei said, I think the earth moves around the sun. But at the time, philosophers knew for sure that the sun moves around the earth. You see it moving in the sky. It was consistent with their religious beliefs, everything. So they said, we don't want to look through your telescope to change our view. We will put you in house arrest. Now, what did they achieve by that? And by the way, I'm in house arrest, but it's because of the pandemic, not because. So what did they achieve by that? They maintained their ignorance, and the earth continued to move around the sun. Reality is the one thing that never goes away, irrespective of whether you ignore it. You can ignore it. Now, there is another example. There is a student at Harvard, that as a result of my book on this subject that is about to come out in a week or so, she was inspired to do her PhD on the theme of my book. So she invited me to a thesis exam just a couple of months ago, and one of the examiners, a professor, asked her, do you know why Giordano Bruno, an Italian guy, was burnt at the stake? And she said, well, he was an obnoxious guy. He irritated a lot of people, which is true. He was an obnoxious. But the professor corrected her and said, no. It was because he said that other stars are just like the sun. There are stars like the sun, and they have planets like the Earth around them, and there may be life on those planets. And that was offensive to the church, because if there is life there, and it had seed, then Christ should have visited those planets to save them, to save the life forms. And you need copies of Christ to visit those planets, and that was unacceptable, so they burned the guy. So you see that throughout history, people are not really open-minded about the heavens, as you said.
Catch new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience for free, only on Spotify. Watch back catalog JRE videos on Spotify.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Einstein made three big mistakes at the end of his career in the 1930s. He argued that black holes don't exist, gravitational waves don't exist, and quantum mechanics doesn't have spooky action at a distance. He argued all these three things at the end of his career when he was the most experienced, And he was wrong. We have experimental data that shows that he was wrong on all three. And what is the lesson from that? Even the smartest person, that was last century in physics, can be wrong if he works on the frontier, because you never know where the truth lies. Okay, you have to take risks. And if people want to just demonstrate that they are smart, it's better not to take risks. And how do you not take risks? If you work on ideas that will never be tested against data, against evidence. So if you work on superstring theory, or on extra dimensions, or on the multiverse, you can do intellectual gymnastics and impress your colleagues that are smart. And you will get jobs, you will get recognition, you will get awards. If that's your goal, that's a completely legitimate framework. But I see it as a violation of our commitment as physicists to understand nature. It's not really about us. Physics is a dialogue with nature. You listen to nature, you see what the experiments are telling you, and you learn. And perhaps you were wrong. You take risks. It's not about your image. It's not getting more likes on Twitter. So that's why I don't really care what my colleagues say. If this object looked unusual. I just talk about it the way I would talk about any other anomaly. And people were asking, why isn't he backing down? Well, I will back down as soon as there is evidence. If I saw a photograph showing that it's a rock, or if I saw some other objects like it, that we definitely have clear evidence that they're naturally produced, then I will give up on it. And I'm not afraid of being wrong. That's part of any work on the frontiers.
This is my thoughts on the quantum physics aspect of this. I think there's not enough people that understand what they're doing to criticize them, so there's no social pressure. The difference between that and the concept of exploring extraterrestrial life is extraterrestrial life is inexorably connected to nonsense. It's inexorably It's connected to crazy people that think that they're talking to aliens, that they're channeling people.
But I have to answer. I have an answer to that.
Okay.
Suppose there was a whole literature on COVID-19 that is completely fictitious. People were saying crazy things about COVID-19 that make no sense whatsoever, and there was a.
Well, you can find them.
Yeah. Suppose there were books about it. Right. There were films about it. Mm-hmm. Now, would that mean that scientists, reputable scientists, should not work on a vaccine for COVID?
No. But
who cares if there are people that say nonsense? You don't care. You ignore them.
COVID-19 is a real thing. You can prove it in a lab quickly, instantly. I mean, it's universally acknowledged as being a real thing.
Right.
The problem with extraterrestrial life is there's no evidence that it's real.
Well, but if you step on the grass and you say, look, it doesn't grow, then obviously because you're stepping on it. So if you bully anyone that works on the subject and young people don't enter into this research field, if you don't fund it at all, you dry it up, then there will not be discoveries.
No,
and then
I
you say,
agree
look, there are no discoveries. I step on the grass, it doesn't grow. Therefore, there is no point in continuing to wait for it, to grow.
I agree with you. No, yeah. I think it's a side effect of our social interactions. And I think a lot of professors, a lot of people in academia, they come from, maybe a more socially awkward environment. They come from a lot of people that get into teaching, a lot of people that get into being professors. They weren't.
Oh my God! I'm so hesitant with the colors I'm trying to pick right now. I don't want to go too dark in the shadow because it does have a lot of. Her skin tone has a lot of red from how the sun is hitting her.
Was actually talking about this very subject.
But this is like
a lot of academics. They try to undermine other people's work. And they do so in kind of a bullying fashion.
Yeah, because it's all about the ego. You see, I was asked by the Harvard Gazette, the Harvard University Gazette, which is the Pravda of Harvard, this official newspaper of Harvard. They asked me, what is the one thing you would like to change about the world? A very big question.
Yeah.
So I wrote an essay. I said, I want my colleagues to behave more like kids. Because as a kid, I remember that. I was mostly curious about the world. I would not be afraid of making mistakes. I wasn't worried about my ego or something really strange happens to those kids that take risks and are not worried about themselves so much. Something bad happens to them when they become tenured professors in academia. Tenure is supposed to give you the freedom to explore, directions that may turn out to be wrong. Mm-hmm. That's what Einstein demonstrated at the end of his career. So you would expect people to take advantage of that. But instead, once professors become tenured for life, meaning that there is no risk to their job, they are starting to pursue honors and awards, status, recognition.
Yeah.
They're afraid of making mistakes. They build these echo chambers where they have students and postdocs repeating their mantra so that their voice will sound louder, so that they will get even more recognition. Now, I say this, the scientific inquiry is not about us. It's about the dialogue with nature, trying to figure out what nature is. It's not about elevating our status, our image. We will all die in several decades, so, it's really not that. Now, actually, Lex Friedman was asking me, Avi, you know so much. What do you think is the meaning of life? And I told him, look, I think just exists. Any meaning that we assign now will go away in 1 billion years because the sun will boil off the oceans.
Yo, tips to fucking Lex Friedman, because I watched his podcasts and interviews too, and he's a really cool intellectual dude. But yo, Lex Friedman has a fucking astrophysicist from Harvard talking to Joe Rogan and just brought his name up casually, like, yeah, I was talking to Lex Friedman, and he asked me what's the. I was like, damn, yeah, that's so fucking cool, yo. Oh, yo, what's up, guys? My bad, it took me a minute to turn around.
On Earth, there will be more life on Earth. All of these things that we call meaning, they are really temporary in the big scale. We should just enjoy the process, just like eating good food. I will not mention another example. Doing this, like eating good food, you enjoy the process. So learning about the world, figuring out what the world is very enjoyable. If I realize something nobody else did and understand something that nobody else did, it gives me pleasure. So just the process of doing that gives me meaning because I enjoy it. So you should live your life in a way that you enjoy it. If you like good food, that's good enough. You can live your life just eating. That's what animals do.
Yes.
Yeah, right? Can have sex, you can do all kinds. But if you want a deeper sort of satisfaction, I think understanding the world is what humans are capable of doing. And that's really a deeper level of enjoying life, so to speak.
Well, there's a lot of examples of professors going out on a limb, being incorrect, and then being punished, being ridiculed, losing their status in the community, or even being correct, but not having the support of your peers who turn on you and turn against you, and then it turns out ultimately they were correct, but there's very little repercussions for that. And there's this thing that happens with people and ideas where they get scared to take on something
Wait, are you
that
home?
could easily make them look ridiculous. And the best example of that is extraterrestrial life.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get ridiculed for believing in it. It's like Bigfoot and then extraterrestrial life.
No, I want to change that. I say this is a subject the scientific community can address with scientific tools, okay, with telescopes. Let's discuss it. The public is interested. Let's forget about the past and look for a better future, right? And my point is, there are many examples for unborn babies, in science, where people were ridiculed and ideas were never pursued or delayed, For example, looking for planets around other stars. That was something that was suggested in 1952 by an astronomer called Otto Struve, who said, if you take Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, put it close to the sun, then it will move the sun back and forth a lot. And you could tell if there is a close-in Jupiter near other stars by looking at their motion, or looking as it occults the star, comes in front of it, transits in front. He suggested that in 1952, for 4 decades, astronomers ignored that. Why? Because they said, we know that Jupiter in our solar system is far away, and we understand why it's far away, and therefore we shouldn't waste our time even looking for something like that. Then, in 1995, a couple of astronomers found a hot Jupiter close to a star, and they got the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for that. So my point is, this is an example of a baby that was eventually born. So people would say, oh yeah, science works, you see, eventually it was found. My point is, it took 4 decades. In those 4 decades, we could have done a lot to advance science. And the other thing is, I say, okay, this baby was born, but there might have been other babies that were not born. Ideas that were put forward and were scrutinized for no good reason, just because people are close-minded. And, the strange thing for me is that I see a lot of innovation in the commercial sector. You see, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Apple, Google, they have parts of their companies that are doing blue sky research, things that are not applied. It all started with IBM and before that. And then in academia, I see a lot of conservatism, much less innovation. as in the commercials. Now, the commercial sector is after making a profit. You would expect academia to be even more open-minded, but it's not. And to me, that must change.
Is this something that you had as an idea before publishing these thoughts about extraterrestrial life?
Yeah.
And did that accentuate it for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't expect the response that I received. It doesn't bother me. In my, I have more than 800 papers that I published and 8 books. In all of these, I talk about anomalies, over the years, I talk about anomalies in other contexts, like in the early universe. And when I mentioned speculative ideas in other contexts, there was no pushback, It wasn't threatening to anyone. It wasn't, but something about the subject of extraterrestrial life bothers people. And frankly, I'm just like a kid. I try to be as close as possible to the way I was at a young age. I'm just doing it innocently, working on this subject the same way I work on other subjects. And I get this response that, now the only reason the two of us are speaking, and I get a lot of media attention is because my colleagues are not behaving the same way. If everyone would accept, I think it's common sense. What is common sense to me, if everyone would accept it, I would be no different than the person next to me. You wouldn't be speaking to me.
Sure I would. No, I still would be. Catch new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience for free, only on Spotify. Watch back catalog JRE videos on Spotify, including clips. Easily, seamlessly switch between video.
Gift card after mail-in rebate when you purchase select Superstart batteries. With the power and opacity your vehicle demands, Superstart batteries are designed for lasting performance and consistent starts. Turn the key with confidence with Superstart batteries only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts. Credit card can offer cash back, but only Discover matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. It's like getting one of those birthday cards that's shaped like cash, so you already know there's cash inside before opening it. But in this case, it's stuffed with your first year cash back match, and you don't even have to send a thank you note. Cashback match, only by Discover Card. Learn more at discover.com/match. Discover, something brighter.
Where's your haircut gone? We know you don't get out as much. You don't drive by your regular sport clips and pop in for that MVP haircut experience that is so much more than a haircut. But isn't it worth getting out for? For that legendary hot steep towel for your face, massaging shampoo that makes you melt into your seat. Oh, man!
Oh my god, the commercials on this shit are just dragging out, dude. Just hurry up and get to the fucking show. Just hurry up and get to the show. Joe Rogan Experience. So I guess Joe Rogan stopped putting full episodes on YouTube. It took me a minute to realize that actually I was today years old when I'm just assuming like now, because for the last, I don't know, week or couple of weeks, well damn, I'm noticing more shit now. Yeah, for the past couple of weeks, I haven't watched an entire Joe Rogan podcast on YouTube because I can't find it. And so just now, like listening to some Joe Rogan, trying to find the full episode of him and that guy Avi, and it's not on YouTube. It's just like a bunch of clips. But now I noticed too, almost every time you watch one of those Joe Rogan clips, he says, get the full episodes on Spotify, watch and listen on Spotify, seamlessly switch between, and it's like, okay, you advertising the hell out that shit, so now I guess you just gotta go to Spotify to watch or listen to a full episode of Joe Rogan?
What's up, Jamie? Good to see you, man.
Hey, Joe. Nice to see you again.
Thanks for coming down here.
It's really my pleasure.
And bringing your chocolate with you again.
You know, I always bring the chocolate. You got to be ready.
Yeah, you're a legitimate chocolate fiend.
I'm definitely a legitimate chocolate.
How much
fiend.
do you eat a day? How much chocolate do you eat?
You know, I every single morning I have chocolate, and it takes about 45 minutes of preparation time. Has about 4 different ingredients. So I start that, and then I have some chocolate over the course.
45 minutes.
Yeah, a lot of it is simmering, so it's not really fully active, but it's some active and some passive intervention.
So is this a preparation that you do? Like, does it prepare you for the day? Is it like a meditation thing?
It's probably some kind of morning ritual, but it just, I don't know, it's very calming for me. And by the time after this 45 minutes, it's like pudding. I mean, it's like this thick, bubbling hot chocolate. It brings me joy. I feel like everyone should start their day with joy.
Well, there's some like positive qualities, and it's not just a good tasting thing, right? Like chocolate has some.
Well, yeah, dark chocolate especially has all kinds of very positive health benefits. I'm not saying that everyone should just eat chocolate bars all day and you're gonna live forever, but actually the woman who lived longest of everyone in recorded history ate 2 pounds of chocolate a week, Jean Calment in France. So at least it could help.
2 pounds seems excessive.
It's a lot, but she lived to 122.
But chocolate's different in terms of like some chocolate is like really sugar based,
yes.
And some chocolate is more of like a kind of. I really like dark chocolate and peanut butter together.
You know,
like a chocolate bar.
Yeah, or like a Reese's Pieces. Yeah, so the dark chocolate is the healthier version of chocolate on average, and so the darker pure cacao, that's where the health benefits are.
But some people think there's like there's some psychoactive benefits to chocolate, right? To cacao.
Well, there is a little bit, yeah. Well, so cacao has been used ceremonially for about 5,000 years, so there definitely is a history of that, and it has some. I mean, it's not as psychoactive as some of the other stuff you talk about on the show, but it has a little bit of it.
Well, we did a podcast before the podcast where we're getting COVID tested out there.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about our experience last time.
Yeah, and so there's another thing that happens that I was reading about. Some people like chocolate because it replaces, it gives them a feeling of being loved. Have you ever read that?
I haven't read that, but I mean, maybe it's true. I don't know whether there's I doubt there's something that's chemical about chocolate, but I think there's probably an association with chocolate and happiness, and everybody's. I hope lots of people's grandmothers gave them little chocolate. So I think that there's a little bit of that. Maybe it's part of the chocolate. Maybe it's part of our experience.
I think it's like God, I wish I could remember it. See if you can find this. Like, really? That's what it is?
This article says it's tryptophan, amino acid, small quantities.
But
flavonoids is the
phenylephrine.
Yeah. Does it have something to do with love? What is what it says here?
Oh, this is fast acting.
Chocolate in the brain, science behind chocolate. But okay, there we go. Butterflies we feel when falling in love. Yeah.
Wow. Great.
You know.
Well, if the internet says it, it must be true.
Must be. That was the idea that I had read, that some people like chocolate, like when they're depressed, like when they're heartbroken.
Yeah.
They're like chocolate, sort of a replacement for love.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, if you're feeling bad and you eat chocolate, you're probably going to feel better. So maybe it is a replacement in a little way.
So you were a part of this open letter recently about COVID-19, where you want to get to the bottom of the origins of it. And this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, and a lot of people have been talking about it lately. Now that Trump's out of office, it's sort of freed up the discussion.
Right.
For the longest time, discussing that in terms of like it not being just some sort of a random mutation from bats and coronaviruses, that it may have been a lab leak, was so taboo because it was what Trump was pushing. And it's so crazy that something which is science, it's a scientific discussion and inquiry, that it could be stunted by these political ideas when someone is so polarizing, like Trump, that people just completely want to reject like very plausible and possible ideas just because of him.
It's exactly right. I was the lead drafter with a community of other people and lead scientists around the world of this letter. And since the beginning of last year, 2020, I had maybe the leading website in the world that was just stating what is the evidence about the origins of COVID-19, particularly the evidence for a lab leak. And the evidence is actually really strong. It's all circumstantial evidence, but we don't have any evidence of the other hypotheses of where COVID comes from, like this series of jumps through different animals in the wild. And so I, for a long time, more than a year, have been saying, hey, we need to look really seriously at this. Not because we know, or certainly I don't know for sure that's where COVID comes from, but in my view, it's the most likely hypothesis worthy of a full investigation. And so there was a World Health Organization organized an independent advisory committee. And they went on a study mission to China in earlier this year, 2021. And then they came out with they had a press event in Wuhan, which was a joint press event between this committee and the Chinese government counterparts. And in that press event, what they said was, we don't support investigating the possibility of a lab leak any further, but we should investigate what seems like a much less likely hypothesis that COVID started with frozen foods being shipped to Wuhan. And so we already had a community of scientists and others who'd been meeting virtually for a while, trying to really say, where does this come from? What's the evidence? We had academic presentations challenging the data, trying to figure out where are the gaps. And we looked at that and said, that can't be right. And we decided we needed to put out an open letter, which we recently released, and it was covered in newspapers all around the world. And the letter made kind of key points. One is that this is a terrible pandemic. We have to understand where it came from. Two, that this current investigation is not the kind of full investigation that's needed. And three, here's what a full investigation looks like, and we call on governments to do it. But your point that it's been taboo for the year is exactly right, and it's just crazy because it seems this is a really, in my view, likely possibility. I can't say for sure. We should be investigating all hypotheses, not saying we can't even look at something that really could be the real story here.
And it's also really unfortunate that a lot of people
getting
are
that
not
Spotify money, I guess.
anything that the World Health Organization says anymore. Because the World Health Organization, I'm sure you saw the spokesperson for the World Health Organization speaking with the reporter.
It's weird, like I missed the shit being on YouTube. Like I know everything is on YouTube. You can just go switch from Joe Rogan and switch to something else on YouTube. Now you gotta go like from YouTube all the way to like a different platform.
Let's just change subjects. And like the woman keeps getting back to Taiwan, and he won't recognize Taiwan because China doesn't recognize Taiwan. And China has some sort of strange, I don't know what it is, but there's some sort of political influence on the World Health Organization.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So first, full disclosure, I'm a member of the World Health Organization International Advisory Committee.
You were into this podcast.
What's that?
I said you were.
Exactly. Bring it on. Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. So I'm actually a real supporter of the World Health Organization. But there's a big problem, and that problem is being realized, and we're seeing it through the course of this pandemic. So first, in the earliest days of the pandemic, why was it that World Health Organization inspectors weren't able to go to Wuhan? And the reason was the Chinese government wouldn't give them visas, and there was nothing the WHO could do. Why was it that the WHO was just essentially, unfortunately, parroting the reporting from the Chinese government in the earliest days? And part of that, at least, is because they don't even have the authority to have their own surveillance network. Why is it, referencing your point about Taiwan, that Taiwan has all kinds of expertise in treating and responding to terrible outbreaks like this, which is why they've only had 9 COVID deaths in Taiwan since the very beginning. Why is it that the WHO is in this weird position? It's in part because the WHO is created by these member states that have a lot of influence, and it's terrible. We're all suffering because Taiwan didn't have a full voice. On December 31st, 2019, Taiwan declared a national emergency on COVID. That was way before we did. I wish Taiwan had had a bigger voice. So WHO is in a really, really difficult position because on one hand, we're asking them to investigate and call out a member state. On the other hand, their governing body essentially is made up of member states, including China.
Yeah, it's just so strange to see scientific inquiry and analysis pushed and manipulated by politics.
Well, that's the whole story here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unfortunately the story of COVID is that. I mean, it was politics that made it so that you could have this outbreak, and we can talk more about where the outbreak started, but wherever it started, whether it was a lab leak or something else, if you had had a fully functioning system, if it hadn't been Chinese politics and the national instinct, the national instinct, or the natural instinct, hadn't been to cover up, to silence the whistleblowers, to lie essentially to the World Health Organization and the international community, it could well have been possible to suppress COVID in the first few weeks, and we wouldn't be having any of this. So, and then it was politics that made China, again, whatever the origin, carry out this massive cover-up over the course of the last year, where they destroyed samples, eliminated or removed databases, imprisoned journalists, Chinese journalists asking tough questions, and put a universal gag order on their scientists, making it impossible for them to speak about any of this stuff.
That's pretty incredible that that's not really well known.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's been more than a year, and I have it on my Jamie Metzl website, and I've been trying to tell everybody, not to point fingers, but to say, like, we have a real problem here. Unless we can just be really honest about what's the problem that we're facing, how are we possibly going to address it?
Now, what is the circumstantial evidence?
Sorry, so let me start from the beginning of this. So we know we have a long history of these pathogenic outbreaks, and they tend to happen in more tropical parts of China and Southeast Asia, and just tropical parts of the world. So when this outbreak began, for me, I had a little bit of background. One of the reasons why I started to get suspicious very early on is I recently, before then, been in Wuhan. And I knew Wuhan wasn't a place where a bunch of yokels are eating bats. Wuhan is a really sophisticated city. It's their Chicago. And I knew that they didn't have horseshoe bats in Wuhan. As a matter of fact, when the outbreak happened, it was winter there, and so there weren't bats there. And I knew early on that this whole story of the wet market was a lie, and as the Chinese government knew, and they for many, many months pushed that story, even knowing it wasn't true.
How did you know it was a lie?
Well, the Wuhan story? Because there was a paper that came out in The Lancet in January of 2020. And in that paper, it made clear that around a third of the first COVID cases had no exposure to that market. And so if everything started in the market, you would have expected all of the early cases to have had a market exposure. And so that was known. Their government knew that in January, but they didn't admit it until May of last year.
Was there a common denominator for all the people that were exposed?
Well, that's the big question now. So that the finding so-called patient zero, that's the essential question. If the lab leak hypothesis is true, then either patient zero would be someone who works at one of these Chinese virology institutes, probably the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or it would be someone who was exposed to a virus that had somehow escaped from that, whether it was through waste or maybe an animal escaped or something like that. If the alternative story that many scientists believe and could well be true, that the patient zero, it comes from a series, there was animal to animal, or called intermediate hosts. It started with a bat and then went back to a pangolin or whatever, and eventually to a human. Then you would find a patient zero somewhere that was that first human. But if, I mean, I think this is a really important point. If that's the case, you'd have to say, well, what are the chances that that patient 0, from this series of animal to human transmissions, it just happens to be, it shows up in Wuhan, which is the only city in China with a level 4 virology institute that has the world's largest collection of bat coronaviruses, that is doing gain-of-function research trying to make those viruses more virulent, particularly by making them more able to infect human cells. So in my mind, if patient 0 is just somebody who had an exposure to an animal, you have the mathematical odds of that person just showing up in Wuhan would be actually kind of absurd.
There's also an issue with the actual structure of the virus itself, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, well, this is a virus that is ready-made for getting to humans. For the first SARS, we were able to track how it jumped, and you could see in retrospect how you could see it got closer and closer, and as the virus mutated, it came more able to infect humans. This virus showed up fully able to infect humans. As a matter of fact, in the comparative studies of different animals, including humans, humans are the most susceptible to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So somehow you have to explain how this virus shows up kind of seemingly out of nowhere in Wuhan, ready for action, ready to fully infect.
Now, this Left4 virology lab that's in Wuhan, what are they doing those studies for? Like, what is the intent?
Yeah, it's a really important question because there are a lot of people who are saying things that I don't agree with, that, oh, this is some kind of military bioweapon, and say what you want about Chinese government, they're not stupid. And so for them, I truly believe, if you had to ask me what's the most likely story, I believe that they recognize that these kinds of pathogens are a big threat to humans, and that we're getting more and more, the frequency of these kinds of outbreaks is growing. And rather than being behind the curve and waiting for some terrible outbreak, the idea was, well, can we predict how these viruses will evolve? Can we get ahead of the game in developing treatments and vaccines for what we think may be coming? And that's what this gain-of-function research is about. And so we know that the Chinese government, the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing this kind of gain-of-function research. Some of it was actually funded with United States government money through the NIH. And I know you'll get a lot of action in the Twitter sphere on this, but so we know, and I truly believe that there was well-intentioned work trying to develop vaccines and treatments, trying to understand how the most dangerous pathogens might develop. And if my hypothesis is true, I think there was an accident. And there's a whole history of people who were warning, saying, well, we're trying to prevent some kind of future threat. But in our effort to prevent it, we're actually increasing the likelihood of it happening.
Wasn't that lab cited in 2018 for safety violations as well?
Yes, yes. So the U.S. Embassy sent a small delegation. They visited the lab, and then there were 2 cables about this saying, hey, this is really dangerous. They're doing experimentation with these dangerous coronaviruses, and their safety protocols aren't up to snuff. So there was a lot of warning and a lot of fear.
Have any of the people that were initially skeptical or pushed back against the idea that it came from this level 4 lab, are they coming around, or are they still digging their heels in?
So some are coming around, and so certainly there are people like Matt Ridley, who's a member of the House of Lords in the UK, a kind of very well-known science communicator. He was firmly on the other side, and now he's started to be more open and actually has been quite vocal.
What was his motivation for being on the other side? Did he?
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting story because in the earliest days of the pandemic, there was a concerted effort by a relatively small number of high-profile scientists, virologists, who recognized that the story was that this came from a series of what are called zoonotic jumps between animal hosts in the wild, that was going to lead to a kind of a positive outcome where we'd say, hey, let's be very mindful of our encroachment into wild spaces, climate change, all those things that we should be very mindful of. But they were, I think, probably worried that if this story became dominant of an accidental lab leak, I mean, that would have huge implications for all of the research that people are doing, and a lot of it is very well intentioned. So early last year, there was a process where a series of scientists did two things. One, they came out with a letter in the British medical journal, The Lancet, which we've subsequently learned was highly manipulated by a small number of people who may have had vested interests. And there was an academic paper in a journal called Nature Communications, and both made the case, oh, this isn't a lab leak. And then there was a concerted effort to label anybody else as a conspiracy theorist. And so I kind of spent last year in that uncomfortable space. I mean, I don't live my life as a conspiracy theorist. I try to be data-driven in everything that I do. But I really felt that this was a very real possibility, and it deserved a full investigation. And it was only in the beginning of this year, 2021, that started to turn. I wrote some things. Someone named Nicholson Baker, he had a great piece in New York Magazine. The Wall Street Journal did a great job covering this, and so the space was starting to open up. Then they had that really, in my mind, ill-fated press event in Wuhan, where it was this independent committee and the Chinese government. And they said, don't investigate lab leak, investigate the frozen food hypothesis. And then in every newspaper around the world, the headline was, World Health Organization says lab leak is not possible, essentially. And so I immediately sent messages to my friends at the World Health Organization and saying, look, this is being misreported. The World Health Organization hasn't said this. And the position of the WHO must be, we have to investigate all hypotheses. And I was very pleased that 3 days later, so the press event was on a Tuesday, that Friday, Tedros Adhanom, who's the Director General, he then said in a press event that we believe that every hypothesis needs to be investigated, which implicitly meant the lab leak hypothesis. And then our letter came out, which was just last week. I mean, it feels it's been such a whirlwind since then, and that's been picked up in newspapers all around the world. So now I feel like there is an opening, and I hope that we can continue. And the goal, in my mind, isn't to prove. Like I don't feel like I need to. I mean, if it's provable, I have to prove it. But it's not to prove that right at this point that it is a lab leak or isn't. But we at least need to have the most thorough, unrestricted, unpoliticized investigation into what happened, with access to all the lab records, all the samples. There's tons of scientists in China who were working on these issues. Very, very few of them have been interviewed. We don't have access to them, and frankly, I think a lot of them are afraid that if they speak up, they'll be imprisoned or worse.
Yeah, that is the problem, right? The people that were initially very vocal and biased towards the idea that it wasn't a lab leak, and you said they were highly motivated, and they labeled other folks as conspiracy theorists. What was motivating them?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky point, and so there's been a lot of controversy around a guy named Peter Daszak, and Peter is an interesting figure, because if you had asked me a year and a half ago, who are the people who you respect most in the field of virology, he would be really at the top of my list. He was one of the heroes of understanding where the first SARS came from. He has an organization called EcoHealth Alliance, who's really trying to get ahead of the curve on understanding these pathogens. But he also, through EcoHealth Alliance, was a funder of Wuhan Institute of Virology, specifically the gain-of-function research that was being done there. And I truly believe it wasn't anything nefarious. The idea was, well, if we want to understand dangerous pathogens, we have to do it in the place where those dangerous pathogens are. Then, under the Obama administration, there was a moratorium on this kind of gain-of-function research. And then it was lifted in the Trump administration. So that's one piece of it. And so for Peter, I understand that his whole experience of his life has been, well, this is where these kinds of outbreaks come from. But this could be just a very different story. And for me personally, that's, I think, one of the reasons why I was able to see this a little earlier, perhaps, than other people, is that, a big chunk of my life has been in the world of science. But another big chunk of my life has been in the world of understanding China. And so I think if you're just in the world of science and you don't understand China, you think, well, the Chinese government says that this isn't from a lab leak. It must not be from a lab leak. But I know that in the Chinese government, they've totally suppressed the entire, basically, history of Mao and all the millions of people who died under Mao. When they got their speed trains going, the first train had this terrible crash, and they just buried the whole train and pretended like it never happened until there was an outcry and they had to dig it up. So I feel like I understood a little bit more about the pathology of the Chinese government. So, but coming back, I think there were people in the kind of more traditional virology world who felt like we're going to open up a whole can of worms if we say, well, maybe it was a zoonotic jump and maybe it was a lab leak.
So this one guy and his influence shaped the way the entire world was addressing this outbreak?
I wouldn't say it's one guy, but it was, I think, a relatively small number of people, because they certainly, the Lancet letter, and it was all kinds of big luminaries who signed it, that really shaped things. And so definitely if the story in the beginning had been, maybe this comes from a zoonotic jump, maybe it comes from a lab leak, we need to look at both options. I think that would have been a much healthier place because there would have been more pressure on China. So it wasn't just one guy, but Peter certainly was very influential. And then, in spite of this conflict of interest, he's actually was selected as a member of this World Health Organization Independent Advisory Committee. So one of the people who went on this mission to China was Peter. He also is the chairman of the Lancet, this same British journal that I mentioned. They have a study group. He's the chairman of that. And I'm not saying he's doing anything wrong. I'm just saying if you have that kind of conflict of interest, you shouldn't be in those kinds of roles.
It's just always so disturbing to someone like me who's a non-scientist, who relies on scientists to be unbiased and to just look at the data, when you find out that things are being influenced by very human factors, like ego and financial gain and relationships with foreign powers and laboratories that they're involved with, and that scares the shit out of me.
Well, you know this better than most anybody, Joe, because you kind of are here every day looking into people's psyche, and people are people, even
who's talking with Joe Rogan? His name is
everybody in the world
I gotta
has a story
downsize the screen.
that explains what they're doing and why. And so I'm sure that you
Jamie
have people on the
Mestel.
show, and he'll give
Jamie
you
is a futurist, author, and founder
at least
of
from the outside,
One
the way I
Shared
would see
World.
it is, well, he's invested his entire life in
His last name is METZL Metzel.
He correctly recognizes that
METZL.
encroachment into wild areas and
Jamie
climate change
Metzel.
are big threats. Wherever COVID-19 SARS-2 comes from, still those are good things to do.
And this motherfucker say, yo, I think it came from the lab, yo.
With the Wuhan Institute of Virology and a friendship
That
with
shit
the
came
people
out the lab.
who work there, and so you can see how my guess, and I can't speak for him, he's become kind of a stakeholder in this story. But we shouldn't. This isn't just about Peter. I mean, there are lots of very prominent scientists. I would say there are more prominent scientists who believe that this comes from a series of zoonotic jumps through intermediate animal hosts in the wild. Then there are who believe that it's more likely to come from a lab leak. But what I will say, I'm in touch with lots of people who are world famous scientists who many people will know, who are privately telling me, we think that there's a 90% chance that it comes from a lab, but really don't want to speak up because we don't want to get pulled into the muck. You were talking about Trump before. People remember the Iraq War, where there were all kinds of experts who were saying, oh, they definitely have nuclear weapons, and then invaded the country. It's like, oh, oops, they don't have it. So people didn't want it to justify any kind of bad things. And as scientists, I mean, the problem is the scientists rely on data, and there wasn't data because China was covering it up. And the journalists require scientists to legitimate claims about the origins. And so there was this weird thing that's lasted for a year, and our hope is, and we're starting to see that our letter has opened up some space where we can have a real honest conversation about let's look deeply into all the possibilities and try to get to the right answer.
What has started to be discussed mainstream, like Newsweek had the cover where it talked about the lab leak hypothesis, and people are talking about it more often. Brett Weinstein, who was very vocal about it very early on, and Heather Hine were just on Bill Maher talking about it.
I loved it, and it was great. I mean, I thought that was a fantastic interview, and that's why I'm so happy to be here with you, Joe, because it's one thing where people have like a gut feeling, like, oh, I don't know China. I feel it was a lab leak, or I want to protect the environment. I feel like, well, this is the kind of thing of nature fighting back. And we don't know, but we have to follow the data and be fearless in asking tough questions.
Yeah, that's a problem that we have with our culture today, is that we've fallen into this very strange situation where we really have two sides of America. We have a left side and a right side, and I don't understand how it happened this abruptly, where it even has an influence on the way we view this pandemic. It has the way we influence. It has an influence on the way we look at scientific inquiry. Like, people don't want certain results because those results would somehow or another solidify this political party that's, so polarizing, or would go against this other party that is more to their liking. And it's just such a strange situation to be. Again, as a non-scientist, someone who relies on scientists to figure things out, what's going on? Like, why is this politics? We're talking about a pandemic. Like, we've got to know what this is and how to fight it and where it came from. And if you think it's just jumping from animal to human that quickly, how often can this happen? Can this happen with other ones? Like, this is not a normal thing. It's usually they can trace it.
Yeah. So, two great points. One, it can happen. It's happening with more frequency of viruses going from, let's say, bats through intermediate hosts to humans. We've seen it with Hendra virus and Nipah virus and other viruses. That's real. But it's really unfortunate, exactly what you're describing, that we live in these kind of information cul-de-sacs where we just are stuck. And it seems to me to just say, well, let's try to be open-minded. And that doesn't mean we don't have views. We all exist on some kind of spectrum, kind of for everything. But if we're just stuck there and we can't even look, we can't even hear what other people are saying, we're going to drive ourselves to not just to ignorance, but terrible decisions.
We just have such a tendency to buy into narratives, and I think now more than ever, because there's there's too much information out there to pay attention to everything.
Yeah.
So we find the information that fits our narrative, we lock into it, we hold on to it, and then we just stick with it and argue against anything that opposes it.
It's exactly, and I'm mindful of it, because especially with all this conversation about the origins of the pandemic, I'm now on Twitter more than I was before all of this, because there's a lot that's...
Terrible place, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's great in a way.
Yeah.
But now every time when I go on Twitter, it's like all these people who I really respect, who agree with me, I see their feeds, and obviously I like their feeds, and because I like their feeds, the next time I go on Twitter, I see more of it. And so that's why we all have to kind of challenge ourselves, because social media is kind of pushing us into two things. One, into these little realities that are self-reflective, and two, into a world where conflict is rewarded more than finding middle ground. Like, if you say reasonable things on Twitter, you get like 3 people like what you say. If you say the most incendiary things, you start like a whole you-know-what storm. And And I just think I think being mindful of the environment in which these ideas are being shaped is as important as the ideas themselves.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, moving forward from here out, what do you think needs to be done in terms of opening up inquiry, being able to completely figure out the origins of this virus, and what could be done to sort of influence the people that are still either on the fence or on the other side?
So the next step is going to be when this joint committee that I mentioned, made up of the Independent Advisory Committee to the World Health Organization and their Chinese government counterparts, they are going to be issuing their preliminary report within a couple of weeks. As I said very publicly, I hope that the report is much better than just the really just atrocious press event that they had on February 9th. In the best case scenario, they'll say, just exactly like we did in our open letter, that one, this wasn't a full investigation. I mean, they essentially had 4 weeks on the ground in Wuhan, 2 weeks in quarantine, and 2 weeks a fully chaperoned, highly curtailed study tour. But if they were to say, here is what a full and unrestricted international forensic investigation into the origins of the pandemic with full access to all samples, records, and personnel would look like, that would be a start. But they're in a real bind because it's going to be a joint report. If they say what needs to be said, just in total honesty and fearlessness, this is the full investigation, examining all hypotheses, including the possibility of a lab leak, it's very likely the Chinese government isn't going to sign off on that letter, on that report. But if they do another compromise, like they tried to do in the February 9 press event in Wuhan, where they try to throw out some tidbits, have a little more information, but not too much upset their Chinese counterparts, then that process is going to be delegitimated. So I don't know how they're going to get out of that bind, but I certainly hope that they're honest. But let's just say hypothetically for now that they're honest. The Chinese government is unlikely to say, oh, sorry about that, we've been doing this full cover-up for a year, we destroyed the samples, eliminated the records, imprisoned the journalists, gagged the scientists, are bad, just come in and do what you want. So then we can say, well, what are the next options? We can try to renegotiate the terms for a new investigation, maybe with different skill sets of people. You still run into the China problem. You could try to go to the United Nations for a stronger mandate. You still run into the China problem. So to tell you the truth, I don't know whether we're going to be able to have the full investigation that we need to get to the bottom of this, but at very least we should articulate what that is. And if China wants to tell the rest of the world, essentially, screw you, we have millions of people dead from this totally avoidable pandemic, the future of our species depends on understanding where it comes from, but we don't want you to look deeply at what happened. At very least, there should be a political cost for that. But at most, we'll get as much information as we possibly can.
I was reading that if China had been honest about it from the beginning and let everybody know about the pandemic, like the moment they knew about it, it would have saved 95% of the lives.
I truly believe that. I mean, and it could be even more. It could be less, but I really think it could be more, because these viruses, I mean, you talked about patient zero. So there was one person who had this. Then it became 2, and then, I mean, that's what exponential growth, what we call viral growth. But the earlier you intervene, the greater the possibility to stop it. And this is certainly a highly contagious virus. But in those early critical days, I mean, China, they silenced the whistleblowers. They started destroying the materials. They didn't share immediately even the genomic sequence of the virus. I mean, really, for the first month, China was absolutely atrocious. And there's a percentage, not the full percentage, but every single person who dies from COVID, part of that is attributable to the failure of the Chinese government, particularly in the first month. There's other parts of it that are attributable to the massive failures that we had here in the United States and elsewhere.
It's such a fascinating country, you know, because they have this weird mix of the government and business. They're intertwined inexorably, right? And they have influence over the media. They have a full lockdown on the internet. And if anybody promotes anything that's negative about the Chinese government, whether it's bloggers or journalists, they just arrest them and make them vanish.
Well, so what I would say is it's the Chinese government. Even business is subject to the Chinese government. And it's an authoritarian system, and we've experienced authoritarian systems before. The Soviet Union was one, but never one as sophisticated as these guys. And it's not like, you know, I traveled in former Eastern Europe in the old days. We talked about it last time I was on the show. I've traveled all through North Korea. And there's one thing when you go to an authoritarian, or in this case a totalitarian system, when it's totally dysfunctional, and you see that when you see people pulling plows on their backs in North Korea. It's another thing to go to a place like China where it's an incredible level of sophistication. I mean, one of the reasons why we're even having this conversation is their level of scientific acumen in artificial intelligence and genomics it's incredible. But they have a real level of control. And if you stay out of politics, there's a lot that you can do. But that's why I am certain that there are many people in China right now who have lots of highly relevant information that could tell us a lot about the origins of the pandemic. Those people don't dare speak because they know that if they do, the cost to them and maybe even their families will be extremely high.
Well, a lot of people that broke stories about it initially have vanished.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is really, that's so spooky.
Well, it's spooky for them and it's spooky for us. I mean, one of the things that this virus has shown us, if we didn't already know, is that all of our faiths as humans are connected. And so, you know, a virus that starts somewhere and spreads, it affects all of us. So our fate is dependent in this and in many other ways on the behavior of governments like China's. And so when they have these kinds of terrible catastrophes, I don't even want to call it a breakdown, because maybe the government was working as designed to prevent the Communist Party from losing face, then it affects all of us. And so this idea that, well, what happens in your country is your business, it doesn't really make sense when we're talking about highly contagious viruses and lots of other things.
Lots of other things. I want to talk about is there anything else you want to say about coronaviruses or about?
Yeah, no, just I encourage. I mean, I have a very strong view that not just that I think the outbreak hypothesis is the most likely, but that what we need is a full and unrestricted international forensic investigation into all this. But I would certainly encourage your listeners not to take my word for it, but to really read the evidence. And that's why on my website, on jamiemetzl.com, I've laid out the evidence. I have lots of links, and I would encourage people just to go there and look and read and disagree. I mean, I think we have to have a space for the conversation. I think that's the key point.
And it should be data-driven. It shouldn't be political. And I'm hoping that it can be now. Now that Trump's out of office, it seems like I personally feel like the country's more relaxed.
Oh my God, it's so relaxed. It's like, well, I think the thing is, everybody wakes up, and then the first thought is, I wonder what I'm going to have for breakfast. It's not taking out the phone. It's like,
what did Trump do?
Yeah, what did Trump do? It's like we don't have to think about politics all the time.
Well, he's so polarizing, unfortunately. You know, because if he did a lot of the things that he did in terms of policy, but didn't have the sort of polarizing personality, we'd have a very different discussion about all these different things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of the policy things, but there was a style, and I think people have always had a sense, I think, for a long time, that if you don't pay attention to government, by and large, at least in the United States, some good things are going to happen. Sometimes there'll be screw-ups. And I think that when you don't have the faith that your government is going to do right, or just what to expect, or it's just that when you hear the voice of the president, it's like it should kind of soothe you a little bit. Like Joe Biden, my former boss, when he speaks, I mean, he's an exciting enough guy, but you think like, all right, I'm gonna listen before bed, and then I'll fall asleep.
You'll fall asleep halfway through the conversation.
With Trump, it's like you listen, and then you're all agitated, and then you pass it to your dog, and your dog is agitated.
Well, Obama was the best example, right? Because he's such a statesman. Like the way he would talk would be so measured, and intelligent, articulate. Everything that he said, like you felt like, all right, he's got it. Yeah. That's how I felt. When I listened to him talk, he would talk like a president. And you go, that's a president.
I mean, when you agree or disagree, and I agreed with a lot of what he did, you think like there's a process that I trust. And I think we've just gone through this experience where many of us just didn't trust the process. It felt chaotic. Yeah. And it didn't feel safe.
But to get back to my point, data, we have to be able to look at these situations like the pandemic outbreak and look at it and not have rhetoric, not have these polarizing conversations, not have a vested interest in it being one way or the other. It has to be just looking at it and analyzing it, and experts looking strictly at the evidence and discussing the evidence without any bias, without a need for one conclusion or the other to be true.
Yeah,
and I don't feel that has been the case.
Yeah.
There's been so many articles. I mean, there was an article written about Brett Weinstein after he came on my podcast about how I was having this guy on to promote this conspiracy theory that's been widely debunked.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that, and there was no data in that article, but it was basically a smear article.
Yeah, and you're going to get it after this podcast. You'll get it more, and I guarantee you, people.
I think less.
I hope so.
And I think the tide's turned on that theory.
But I think that even in the response to our letter, I mean, we've had the media response has been great, but there are a lot of people who've been saying, well, there are more prominent scientists who are saying that the zoonotic theory is more likely, and my feeling is they may even be right, and I welcome the conversation, but we have to have the conversation.
You have to have the conversation. So is there a possibility of getting those prominent scientists that do have this opinion and matching them up with prominent scientists that believe the lab leak hypothesis and having some sort of an actual scientific debate?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was a private thing, but I will now make public in our conversation. So I sent a note a few days ago to Peter Ben Mbarek, who is the person who leads the World Health Organization organized independent advisory committee. And when I said to Peter in that note, and I haven't yet heard back, but I imagine I will now, I said, why don't we have a private Zoom dialogue between the members of your committee and the signatories of our open letter, and let's just have this conversation. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do. And I hope it's possible. Certainly, in writing this letter, our goal wasn't to shut down conversation, but to open space for it.
Well, that's best case scenario. Best case scenario is scientific inquiry is supported and becomes something we could all look at and say, okay, these guys are acting rationally now, and let's figure out where this came from and how does it stop? Yeah. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Yeah. The level 4 virology lab in Wuhan, are they still operational?
They are. They've been taken over by the military. I mean, the first thing happened after the outbreak is that the Chinese military came and took over. And it's not only that, there are lots of other virology institutes around China and around the world. I mean, right now, Singapore, for example, is building a level 4 virology institute. So there's a real conversation to be had. One is, how should we think about safety in these kinds of virology institutes, these kinds of biolabs? Second, should we have them at hub cities like Wuhan or Singapore, or should we just put them out in the middle of Siberia or someplace like we put nuclear waste? And those are the kinds of conversations that we need to have. And that's why, coming back to your earlier point, this issue of polarization is so significant, because, again, if we can't have the conversation, we're screwed.
Well, here's another question, rather. What did they learn in studying these super dangerous viruses that was applicable in this pandemic? Because you would hope that if you're going to study these super dangerous viruses, you're going to have some solutions. But it didn't seem like there was any solutions on the table when the pandemic initially started.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there are people like, there's a scientist, Mark Lipsitch at Harvard, who have been traditionally one of the big opponents of gain of function research. And they said you have the danger of realizing the thing that you're trying to prevent. So there were academic papers that, I mean, this is going to sound crazy, that said, oh, hey, it is possible to make coronaviruses more able to infect human cells. Like, that was, I guess, it's useful information. Now we have lots of evidence that coronaviruses can mutate in ways that make them more able to infect human cells. We have hundreds of millions of examples, more than 100 million examples.
But was there any research on how to combat that?
So that was what they were trying to do. But I think that they made progress in identifying the problem. As far as I know, there wasn't any significant, like, were we that far ahead in developing vaccines? No. Were we that far ahead in developing treatments? No. And that's why I'm a little more sympathetic to the people who are critics of this aggressive gain-of-function research than to the people who are its proponents, like Peter Daszak, another scientist at the University of North Carolina named Ralph Barrick, and others, because I just think that there are almost an infinite number of viruses that can threaten us. If we are going to try to push these viruses to make them more dangerous, I mean, we have to question, is that the right thing to do? And if we do it, we just need to make sure, do we have all of the safeguards in place? And that seems to me as an international question. I mean, if China, with all of its problems and all of its insufficient safeguards and the culture of pushing science ahead as a vehicle for national greatness, if they're just making their own decisions about safety for these viruses that have the potential to kill as many people as they've potentially now killed, but that's not just a Chinese issue, that's an everybody issue.
Also, no accountability in terms of, like, hey, show us what you were doing to try to stop this virus. Show us what you were trying to do when you were examining these viruses and doing experiments on them. What progress did you make in terms of how to stop a pandemic or how to combat these viruses? Where is the work?
No, it's exactly right. And let's just say there's work. That's why in the earliest days of the pandemic, the right response from the Chinese would be to say, all right, this terrible thing has happened. It started in Wuhan. At Wuhan, we have the world's leading center for studying bat coronaviruses with the largest collection of bat coronaviruses. We are going to make everything open right now because let's get to the bottom of this. And but instead, they did the exact opposite. They removed access to all of the viral databases. So still to this day, nobody knows what viruses they had. They gagged all of the scientists. There could be scientists in China who actually have known a lot from the beginning about this virus, how it functions, how we might respond to it. Those people have no access to the international community, and that's why there are these pathologies of the Chinese state, which are bad enough if you're living in China. But we're all, whatever the origins of the pandemic, we're all, I think, being victimized by those pathologies now.
And has China offered any information about how to combat the virus? Have they contributed to the development of the mRNA viruses?
Well, first, in terms of a public health response, I mentioned that China was absolutely atrocious, particularly in the first month or two of the virus. They also mounted the most aggressive and, in many ways, highly successful response, public health response to containing it. And so certainly China has been helpful in sharing the lessons. I mean, not everybody has that kind of authoritarian system, but when there's a story that helps China, China has been more helpful. And now, even with this idea of, well, where does the virus come from? So China has been very aggressive trying to look for animal hosts. They haven't found any. There's no evidence of it. They've been even more aggressive with this, in my view, somewhat nutty, but maybe worthy of exploration idea that it came from frozen foods shipped from someplace else. I mean, there's absolutely no evidence that that's the case, but not helpful with this, and certainly not helpful with providing access to the scientists who've been studying, just to your point, who've been studying this for years, and the access to those people has mostly vanished.
So they didn't really contribute to treatments. They basically figured out a way to lock people in their homes and isolate. They had more power over the population in terms of like stopping their movement.
But in treatments, they also have they have their own vaccine.
When did they develop their vaccine?
Yeah, they actually developed it a little faster than ours. But it had when the first tests came back, it only had about a 50% efficacy rate, so it was a bad vaccine. But they had the first vaccine. They're now working to develop an mRNA vaccine like the Pfizer and Moderna.
What was their vaccine?
Their vaccine was it was an attenuated virus vaccine.
But it wasn't very effective.
It wasn't very effective.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is quite a bit less effective.
And that's
one shot.
Yes, right? and so that one, it's called a Trojan horse vaccine, and basically you get a virus that is basically a non-harmful virus. You kind of neutralize it by taking out its kind of delivery package, and then put the gene that's delivered through that other virus into the body. Whereas the mRNA vaccine, what that's doing, it's hijacking the machinery of your cells and saying, hey cells, here's like the mRNA is the messenger RNA. We kind of hijack it. Here's a new message, and we say the message is cells make this spike protein, which is something it's not part of normal human body, but we make this little protein, and then our body says, our immunological system says, hey, this is an alien thing, and it mounts a response, and that's what gives us our immunity.
And the problem that I'm reading about the Johnson & Johnson virus is there's religious opposition to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was made from cell lines that were derived from aborted fetal tissue.
Yeah, aborted fetal tissue in the 1980s. So it's so I just want to be clear that all of these vaccines, certainly the American ones, I think are very effective, great vaccines, and everybody should be happy to take whatever ones they have access to. There were some Catholic bishops, and the Vatican was not fully this way, who said that because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was derived in small part, from a cell line taken from an aborted fetus in the 1980s, if you have a choice, you should avoid that. I think, in my view, that was an unfortunate statement. I mean, we are in a crisis here. I think this is about health and safety. If anybody has access to a vaccine, it's my view they should take it, not just for themselves, or they should do it for themselves, but it's also the faster we can reach herd immunity, the more the people who can't take vaccines will be protected, whether it's people in chemotherapy and other things.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, since it's less effective, does it have less side effects?
No. Well, I mean, all of these vaccines have, at least the American ones, and pretty much all of the vaccines have very, very minimal side effects, as far as we know. I mean, these are all vaccines that have been rushed, but I see no reason I don't think there's some kind of hidden thing that 2 years from now we're going to find out that these vaccines are more dangerous than with them.
No, I'm not saying that, but the side effects were, some people have been pretty extreme. Like Ben Stein was just on television talking about, or on the internet rather, talking about the side effects that he experienced.
Yeah, well, people
pretty ruthless.
Yeah, and people are. I mean, this is what we're doing, is we're getting our body, like if your body, if there's some kind of alien invasion, that's what we've evolved for, and that's what every time you get a fever or whatever, it's your body's fighting something, but in that fight, your body is getting stronger. I definitely think that there are. I wouldn't even. I mean, maybe you can call them side effects, but it's like your body is mounting this kind of response.
It's not a side effect; it's a consequence.
It's a consequence. That's exactly right.
Let's talk about I want to talk because we got into a little bit about China and genetics, and there was an article that I read recently where there was some sort of program to try to make Chinese men more manly. That the government was instituting some sort of a program, and I read that and. See if you can find it because it was a weird article. They were like doing these like manly exercises and shit.
Like what are manly exercises?
That's a good question. I guess
maybe we should
lifting.
Oh, all right.
Something along those lines. But the real ethical dilemma, and this is your area of expertise, right? In terms of genetic engineering, the ethical. There's many ethical dilemmas, right? One of them is the haves and the have-nots.
Sure.
That's the big one to me. It's like if really wealthy people can figure out how to genetically manipulate their children and their bodies before it's available to anyone else, they'll have some massive advantage that the gaps between the haves and the have-nots will grow ever wider.
Yeah, I mean that's a real possibility.
China promotes education drive to make boys more manly. So you see these boys.
Yeah.
What are you doing there?
I don't know if that
punching
that's
sand.
Hilarious. Yeah, I don't think that genetics, but
so?
it seems like whatever they're doing,
they're flexing.
Yeah.
Because the middle guys get some good chest muscles.
Yeah.
What does it say here? Chinese government. What does it say? Proposal to prevent the feminization of male adolescents.
I guess they don't want Chinese men to become too metro.
Well, is metro feminization? I thought metro is just style.
That's what I think, but I don't know.
Feminization seems like a different take.
Yeah, so I don't think this is genetics. I think it's culture.
For sure.
Yeah.
But my question is, when does it lead to genetics? It says, while Chinese government has signaled concern that the country's most popular male role models are no longer strong athletic figures, like, in quotes, army heroes.
If I had to guess, I do a lot with Korea, and in Asia, there's a thing called Korean Wave, and it's Korean culture. As a matter of fact, you can pull up Korean Wave on this screen. But there's like the Korean pop stars and these movie stars, they have a little bit of a feminine look, and I think that style has spread certainly across Asia and Japan and
Korean.
Oh, there you go. My guess is
that's feminine. That guy looks jacked.
Yeah, well,
look at the guy in the middle. That's not feminine at all.
All right, okay, fair enough.
That guy gets all the ladies.
Anyway, we welcome all Koreans on Twitter to give us your thoughts. But my guess is that the Chinese modern history, it all comes out of the mythology of the Long March, this kind of fake history that the Chinese government has, that they fought and defeated the Japanese, where in fact the nationalists were the ones who actually fought the Japanese. So my guess is that with this story is they're afraid of kind of their society becoming quote unquote soft, like they maybe see the Koreans, the Japanese, and us.
That's interesting that us, really? Americans. Yeah. Are we feminizing as well?
I think.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't know whether we are, but my guess is they see us as softening and weakening.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do. My question is, do you think that there's a real possibility of some sort of a government program to manipulate genetics? And now that we understand that CRISPR is a real tool and it's viable, and we can, like, they've used CRISPR on living humans, not just on fetuses, right?
In China.
Can you explain how they do that?
Yeah. So it's really an incredible story. If you don't mind, I'll just go back a little bit. So last year, 2020, the Nobel Prize in chemistry went to Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, who are scientists who developed the tool that you just mentioned called CRISPR. In 2012, they had their famous paper came out, which was essentially describing a basic science tool, something that you would do in a lab. 6 years later, in 2018, the world's first 3 genetically modified CRISPR babies were born in China as a result of highly, in my view, unethical human experimentation by a Chinese biophysicist named He Jiankui. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization committee on which I serve was created in the aftermath of that. So what He Jiankui was doing and trying to do was to change one gene to try to give these 2, and then it became 3 kids a greater resistance to HIV later in life. It doesn't look like he succeeded. But we've entered the era of genetically modified humans, and it's just in this little way, and more broadly, we're entering this period where our species has the increasing ability to read, write, and hack the code of life.
Wasn't there some sort of because they were trying to give them resistance to HIV, didn't it impart some sort of cognitive benefit?
Well, there were stories that it may have from some experiments that were done in mice, and there was some analysis that was later partly debunked from the UK Biobank that suggested that. But excuse me, the short answer is nobody really knows, and that was why it was so unethical to do these human experimentations, because the outcomes were so unknown. Having said that, even though this was a terrible first step, it's my absolute expectation that in the future, and whether that future is 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 50 years from now, we will begin a process of genetic modification of humans that will start very small. It will certainly start with making changing single mutations that would otherwise condemn a child to die of a terrible, deadly genetic disorder. Yeah. That will be the starting point. But over time, as we increasingly understand the complexity, not just of the human genome, but of systems biology more broadly, we will move from that smaller bit of engineering to bigger. We'll also use tools of embryo selection. Right now, an average woman going through IVF has about 15 eggs extracted. Let's say you have 10 viable pre-implanted embryos in vitro fertilization. So now you can screen each one of those 10 embryos, and you can rank order them roughly in likely tallest to likely shortest. In a small number of years, likely highest genetic component to likely lowest genetic component of IQ. This is all highly, highly controversial stuff, but this is where we're going. So I do think that it will be possible that we'll have embryo selection, and then very likely we'll be able to use stem cell technology called induced pluripotent stem cells to turn adult cells into stem cells. So just to make it practical, like let's say a woman has a skin graft, and there's millions of skin cells. You induce those skin cells into stem cells into egg precursor cells into eggs. Now let's say you have 10,000 eggs, and average male ejaculation has hundreds of millions or sometimes low billions of sperm. You fertilize those 10,000 eggs, use high throughput screening to extract a few cells and sequence them from each, and now you have 10,000 options. And then you have real possibilities, and you don't even need to use genome editing. Our ancestors took chickens laying 1 egg a month and turned them into chickens laying 1 egg a day, not knowing anything about genetics, but just through this kind of selection. And what does it mean for humans, for agriculture, for so many other things when we are the drivers of that evolutionary process?
That's where people get really uncomfortable, right? Because now we're entering into what many people would consider eugenics.
Yeah.
Right? You're engineering the human race for the most favorable outcomes. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but sometimes less favorable outcomes create a different strength.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is such a wise point, and it's essential, because you talked earlier about equity as being one of the issues. But an equally big issue is your point, diversity. And so if you gave everybody a choice, well, what kind of kid would you want? Maybe everyone would say, I want
The Rock.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I want my kid to like The Rock.
Exactly.
Everybody would say that.
Yeah, no, I want The Rock, who with the mind of Einstein and whatever. And it's not wrong. It's just within the context of our society, those seem like good ideas. Just like if you were a dinosaur and someone asked a T-Rex, what kind of kid do you want? The T-Rex, like, I want a kid. I want a big tail. I want sharp fangs, and But then the
longer arms.
the asteroid hits, and being a cockroach was actually the right answer. And so
being a crocodile.
Yeah, exactly. So
rotten meat.
exactly, that's true. But it's overcooked.
What up?
So we don't know what the future holds, and our
My bad, y'all. I was doing a
evolutionary
time lapse
diversity,
video
that's
the whole
what
time.
in the
Hopefully
Darwinian
it
sense,
came
we
out
talk
all
about
right.
random mutation. That's just diversity. It means that something that
I feel like I gotta get this.
now, like being a big T-Rex, in some future event, is actually a disadvantage. So if we start making even well-intentioned decisions even to eliminate terrible diseases, it may be that we limit not just our diversity, but through our diversity, our resilience as a species.
Well, there's also human beings tend to.
Right. The more time people spend
I'm gonna go get me some dinner ready.
construction of new methods, technology, new things, the more time they spend on that, the better they're going to get at that. If they're more sexually viable, if they're more aggressive, if they're more athletic, there's going to
Alright. Take this with me. Catch y'all next time. Peace.